I've just spent 2 months visiting the US, and as a French person, I noticed that there are some things that I totally got wrong. For example, one thing I fully misunderstood before visiting the US was how much cultural difference there is between places. As Europeans, we hear so much about the US, either from TV shows or the news, so we tend to think that we know the American culture, but I personally had no idea how things change so much from place to place, and that's something I noticed right away on my first trip to the US. So I've been coming to the US for over 10 years to visit friends and family, and I swear as Europeans we're unaware at how big the cultural differences are from place to place, and that's something I love discovering and learning about. Like for example, during this trip we decided to go to Texas, and I had been there before, but here I visited some new places, discovered some new foods, and even went to the Texas State Fair, which is something I had never seen before in my life. We also went to Tennessee and to Georgia, and I could feel the difference between all of these states right away, not only in food but also in people and culture. And while there's a pretty big difference from state to state, where you live as well within the state kind of matters a lot. Like there's a big difference from city to city and as well as from city to country. Like first, obviously the landscapes are very different. I've been to over 15 states now and things don't really look the same. Also, different regions have different historical backgrounds and I really love learning about them. Like recently on the channel, I did a deep dive on the Cajun culture of Louisiana, and this was so fun and super interesting. Also, when we were in Texas, we learned about the history and the heritage of this state, which was so interesting to me as someone who's French and has Spanish origin. But anyway, we'll get a bit deeper into the topic of heritage in a bit, but now and every time I come back to the US, I feel that any attempt to define all Americans at once and say something like all Americans are this or all Americans are that is like 100% wrong. Like there's 340 million people in the US, so when I hear someone say something like that, I can't help but intervene and tell them that the US is a very diverse place with a lot of different types of people. You know, like any country or region, I would say. And I say that a lot because one thing I love about the US and that I personally benefited from when I was living there a few years ago is that it's a place where you can truly create your own lifestyle and unique identity. And this is more than a thing I just misunderstood. Like as a French person, I truly didn't know you could actually do that. So let me explain. So even though France is a very diverse country as well, there's a strong sense that there's a right way to do things because we've always done them this certain way. A silly example that everyone can understand is that there's a right way to make a croissant and there's no reason to change it. It's just perfect and delicious as it is. But I do feel sometimes that people value tradition and having a clear, understandable identity a bit too much for my taste. Like for example, I went to a very good college in France and people still ask me about it regularly, even though I'm a 32-year-old YouTuber right now. So it obviously doesn't matter too much. And one thing I'll always remember from my education is that I always was pushed towards numbers and I ended up studying finance because I was pretty good at it, but I didn't really like it. And when I asked about a different path I could take, a teacher told me that it was, I quote, not for people like me. And I'll guess we'll never know what she meant exactly, but I took it as there is one right path you should take. So yeah, with that French cultural context, I kind of thought that your identity was something that was fixed and that I had to follow a specific life path. And that is until I moved to the US and I felt that people felt more free to live in their own unique way and, you know, do things differently, pivot if they didn't like something, or just try new things. And luckily for me, I noticed this pretty early on, not only from living in New York City, which is a super diverse city with all types of people, but also from taking a road trip to rural Colorado, where in 1 week I got to talk to a rancher family that was passionate about hunting and that had a lot of taxidermy animals in their living room, a firefighter in a reservation, an online shaman, and a tech guy passionate about electric cars. This was kind of a big revelation to me because I love how forward people are in the US about their identity and how free people feel to live their own unique lives. So yeah, this might seem silly if you're an American, but at the time I was young and I didn't know you could follow pretty much any life path you wanted and not what you should be doing. So at the time I was working an investment banking job in New York City, and talking to all types of people who are doing things a bit differently kind of inspired me to quit without anything lined up. And the reactions were pretty interesting because all my French friends were slightly horrified and a bit concerned for me, whereas my American friends were so happy for me and thought it was the best decision ever. So yeah, I really love how in the US it's socially accepted to try new things and, you know, pivot if you don't like them or things don't work out. And this mindset has unlocked choices that I didn't even know were available to me, like being a YouTuber. So yeah, I clearly wouldn't be here if I hadn't lived in the US. But surprisingly, the thing I struggled the most with when I first moved to the US is actually a thing I I love now that I've fully accepted it. I've talked about it before on the channel, but making friends as an adult, when you're not in college, for example, is already pretty hard. But making friends as an adult in a fully new place where you don't really understand the culture is even harder. So when I moved to the US, I truly misunderstood how friendly people were because everyone wanted to talk to me. People told me they wanted to make plans with me. People were inviting me to their homes, but actually no one followed through. And at first this was really hard for me because I misunderstood friendliness for being actually friends with someone. And friends were a bit more guarded as a culture. So you wouldn't just invite a random person to your house just to be polite. If you invite someone to your house, you're actually making plans with them and they will come to your house. And when I first moved to the US, there kind of was a moment when I noticed that I didn't have any friends and that all those friendly people were actually just being nice and polite with me. And I fully misunderstood them. Obviously, this was a very hard revelation, but once I understood this and accepted that we just have different social norms around friendliness and being friends. This was amazing because I actually knew how to make friends after that. So yeah, luckily I understood this. I made friends through hobbies and through friends of friends, and now I am proud to say that I do have friends in the US. And that if someone invites me to their home or is overly friendly to me, I know how to make the difference between being polite and wanting to be friends with me. But one thing I feel I'll never get used to is eating habits. And I actually forgot about this point because this is so ingrained in my culture. But my boyfriend Bobby, who as many of you know is American, told me to specifically at this point. So if you've watched any of my other food videos before, it will come to no surprise to you that in France, as a culture, we really love food. And we kind of have specific eating times. Like growing up, for example, I shared all of my meals when I was not at school with my parents. So breakfast, lunch, and dinner, we would always eat as a family at the dinner table. And most of the people I know have grown up like this. So this means that a lot of French people, including me, will eat lunch between 12:30 and 1 p.m. and dinner around 7:30 to 8 p.m. Often a lot of restaurants close their kitchens if you're not within those eating times. And even at work, you kind of have to share lunch with your colleagues. Like, it would be weird if you didn't. And at first in the US, it would be kind of hard for me because I never understood if we were going to eat or not. Like, it has happened to me so many times that I meet someone at 7 p.m. and they've already eaten. Like, I kind of feel that if you meet with me during my regimented eating times, you kind of have to feed me. Otherwise, I'll feel hungry and sad. And also at special events, kind of anything goes in the US. So I don't always understand whether something is lunch or dinner. And I know this is a social construct that lives in my head, but I cannot get rid of it. Like, I remember being invited to something that I thought was a celebratory lunch at 3 p.m. And when I stood up from the table and thanked the host for a very nice lunch, I noticed everyone was kind of looking at me weird because apparently it was a dinner. So yeah, I don't think I will ever get used to it. But I just try to be more flexible and adapt to things as they go. And another French thing I love bringing with me to the US is skincare. I personally feel that French skincare is really good, and it's also easier to find products that use only good ingredients, like today's sponsor, Typology. Typology is a French skincare brand, and all their products are made in France. I've been using their products every day for over a year, and they are perfect if, like me, you enjoy a no makeup natural look that still gives you a little bit of an extra boost. My favorite at the moment is their Glow Drop. They contain vitamin C and aloe vera, and I like to use them with my moisturizer when I don't want to spend too much time getting ready. I also love their concealer because I was born with dark circles under my eyes, and this is really a lifesaver because it both hides them but also reduces them because of the active ingredients. And their tinted lip oil is really nice too. It's always a nice finishing touch if I want to look extra nice. At the moment, they are offering a free full-size hair repair mask with every purchase of $40 or more. So it's the perfect time to try high-quality French skincare. But one deeper thing I actually only understood recently when I moved from my 20s to my 30s is how important individual responsibility is in the US. Let me explain. So when I was working in New York, this was in my 20s, and a lot of my colleagues were a bit older than me, were kind of making those dark humor jokes about not getting fired when they found out they were gonna be parents. And since I was a European in my 20s, I just didn't get it, because in France, France, health, children are seen more as collective responsibilities. So when people find out they're gonna be parents, people talk more about how much parental leave they're gonna take. So from an outsider point of view, it seems that having children or healthcare are more seen as personal responsibilities and personal decisions in the US than in France, where we have more of a sense of collective responsibility for that. But now that I'm at the age where people are having babies and I know how much things cost, I fully get it. Like, there's a big pressure to not get fired when you know how much having a child costs without insurance. So overall, as an outsider, it feels that in the US, some things that as a European, I would see as a collective responsibility, like having children or healthcare, are more put on the individual and are seen as personal decisions. And I've kind of talked a bit about that in the past, and a lot of you have told me something along the lines of, our healthcare is not really much more expensive if we account for taxes, you pay higher taxes in Europe. And you know, I get it, I haven't done the math, but my personal feeling is that I'm happy that my taxes go to healthcare because I like that no one I know has crazy medical debt, for example. But I also get that in the US, people who prefer that is often because they trust themselves more than they trust the system. And it's kind of this idea of self-reliance that I've seen expressed by a lot of people I've talked to. And I would probably think the same way if I had grown up like this as well. So another way I see this idea of self-reliance is when we compare the car culture in the US versus the public transport culture in Europe. So you've probably heard about it, but in Europe, our cities are made around public transport. And even in the countryside, there's still some kind of public transport that people use. Like, for example, my parents spend a lot of time in Ariège, which is one of the least visited and least dense regions of France. And even in their tiny village, there's still a minibus, and this is mostly made for people who don't have a car or who can't drive because maybe they're sick or maybe just too old to drive, or they just don't want to drive anymore. We also have a great network of trains, and this is not only in France but in all of Western Europe. And the result is that as a 32-year-old that has always lived in cities, I've never felt the need to own a car. And when I first started to visit the US, I actually was only researching public transport routes to go from place to place, and I found that these take so much longer than driving. And for example, this is one of the reasons I've never been to LA. Like, I'm like, okay, as a tourist, I want to see like Venice Beach, downtown, maybe do a trip to Disneyland, I don't know. But just doing those like top things to do in LA takes hours by public transport. And I don't know, it seems that there's a lot of big traffic jams. And that's why I actually passed on that trip every time I had the occasion, because as a European, it seemed like an insurmountable hurdle for me. And there is a network of trains in the US, which I love. I've actually crossed the US from New York to San Francisco by train, and this was one of the best experiences of my life. It's so beautiful. I really recommend you do it. But you know, let's be honest, this is not a real transportation method. You're doing that for the experience, for the beautiful landscapes, but not really to go from point A to point B, because crossing the US by train takes around a week, where you can just hop on a 6-hour flight and be done with it. So yeah, that's something I've grown to appreciate, especially with my Amtrak trips. I love trains in the US, I take them for fun, but when I have to go somewhere, I usually rent a car and I let Bobby drive because as an American, he has been driving since he was 16, and I only got my driver's license 4 years ago, which might seem crazy if you're American. So I have accepted that if you want a sense of freedom, you do need a car, but if you want to take your time, you can take the Amtrak. Quick change of pace, we're gonna get into a very deep topic, and I still cringe at myself for how bad I misunderstood this one, but let me explain how I used to think back in the day and how I've changed. So some of you might know it, but I love languages, and I try to speak the 4 languages I know as much as I can. And one of these languages is Italian. I speak it pretty badly, but it's, you know, enough to travel to Italy, and I really want to improve it. And when I moved to the US, I actually met a lot of people who told me they were Italian. And my reaction every time was to tell them that I was trying to learn Italian and that I wanted to speak Italian with them to practice. And of course, every time the person would be so confused, probably thinking, why is this weird girl trying to speak Italian with me? Because they were Italian American and not Italian from Italy. So most of the time they didn't speak Italian. This little cultural misunderstanding is such a good example of how differently we see heritage and nationality in Europe versus in the US. If you're in Europe and you say, I'm Italian, it means you have an Italian passport and you speak the Italian language. If you're in the US, a lot of people who would say, I'm Italian, they actually mean I have Italian heritage, like maybe their grandma came from Italy or they were raised in the Italian-American culture. And at first it's something that I found a bit silly and I misunderstood because I didn't understand why someone would define themselves as Italian when they didn't have an Italian passport and didn't speak Italian. Like, in my head, they were American with Italian origins, not Italian. And by the way, this worked with pretty much every nationality. At the time, I couldn't understand how someone would define themselves as Scottish, Irish, German, and yet have never set foot in the country. But then something happened, and that's why it's so interesting to live abroad, because you see that things you thought were true and were basis of your culture are thought of differently in different countries. But what made things click for me is first I got interested in Bobby's family history. So his family did come from Italy back in the day, and then also US immigration history, which is so interesting. And I understood that it's just a different way of talking about your culture and your heritage. And it's just as valid as the way I grew up with. So yeah, if we go back to the Italian American culture, which is the one I've been the most immersed in because of Bobby's family, but also because I used to live in New York City. It feels to me that it's a distinct culture from the Italian culture of Italy that kind of evolved on its own. So, a bit like when I learned about the Cajun culture of Louisiana, I felt that we had some things in common. Like, there's a sense of being distant cousins or something, but it's like having two cultures that have a shared origin but then evolved completely different. And this celebration of heritage is something I really love in the US. I find it very cool. I love that it's a country built on immigration. This makes me, a foreign person in the US, feel more welcome. And in terms of food, it is awesome because you can eat food from all over the world thanks to this immigrant history. This is just an example of how living abroad in the US and coming back to visit truly changed the way I think. And honestly, it kind of opened my mind to new ideas I never thought of before. There are so many things that I love and that are now part of my personality. And I was able to do that because of my commitment to trying not to judge things, but keeping an open mind and always trying to understand and accept the US more as a culture. So if you're watching this, I really encourage you to do that as well. Learning about other cultures, not only the US, has been one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. And if you want to learn about the French culture, I've made some videos for you and you can watch them here next.